carpenter to work for $6 an hour at a 1-hour photo lab processing people's vacation photos. They were terrible pictures, but I was doing something that I really had an interest in. A year working for this 1-hour photo lab, I became the manager. An opening came up in the local newspaper in Franklin, Tennessee, and I applied for the opening and I got the job. $6.50 an hour. Still starving. I worked for this newspaper, this really small paper in Franklin, Tennessee, 8 years. I started off chasing ambulances when they went by, running emergency traffic. I didn't have a police scanner, but I had my camera, and I would chase them and tried to not cause any accidents, but it was fun, it was exciting, it was incredible. And I bought my own scanner, but I went on to win 14 University of Tennessee Press Awards for this tiny little newspaper. And eventually I started freelancing for the Tennessean newspaper out of Nashville, Tennessee. It was the 57th largest newspaper in the country at the time. On one of my assignments for the Tennessean, I was sent to photograph a minister of a little church in the mountains of Appalachia. It was the Smoky Mountains. I began working on a photo story about this church and this pastor. And I visited many times, and on one of my visits, the pastor asked me where I stood with God. And I told him about the things that happened to me as a little boy. And I told him that I didn't think that I could ever forgive this man. This pastor stayed after me. He said, to have Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you have to forgive all that have sinned against you. Not only that, you have to pray that they too would receive Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. And I just couldn't imagine that happening. I mean, some things are unforgivable, right? That's the toughest lesson I've learned in my now 53 years. Our very salvation depends on our forgiveness. It's contingent on it. You have to forgive. It's not an option. You have to find a way in your life to find forgiveness for even the most terrible things that happen. But like I said, at 43 years old, I finally came. I was out of the Army at 19 years old. I got hooked back up with my brother and my 2 sisters and found out that at the same time I was being molested, so were they. I was the oldest boy. I should have been able to protect him and I couldn't. What did I do? I ran off and I left him to that monster. And I felt so guilty for what had happened. I finally became so consumed by hate for this man. All I could think about was killing him for what he did to my brother and my sisters. I was consumed. And one night after church services at this tiny little church in the mountains of North Carolina, on my 3.5-hour drive back to Nashville, Tennessee, out of nowhere, I just started crying. And I prayed for that man that had done those terrible things to me and my brother and sisters. I had to pull off the interstate. I was crying so hard I couldn't see. On the side of the road, Interstate 40, somewhere between Knoxville and Nashville, Tennessee, at 2:30 in the morning, I found forgiveness in my heart and dedicated my life to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Thank you. You know, it was, you hear these stories and, you know, we're all very skeptical. That's what we are as people. If anything, we're skeptical. And I hear people say, oh, it just came over me. You know what? That's exactly what it did. But it didn't come easy. I wasn't a Christian and I was praying for forgiveness because I was so lost. I was so consumed by hate. You know what? That hate turned to pity. All I could feel was sorry for this alcoholic stepfather of mine. The hate completely went away, and you can walk away from pity, but you cannot walk away from hate. Within 3 months of my profession of faith, I received a call from USA Today to photograph this incredible surgical procedure on a little boy still in his mother's womb. Now I've gone from shooting pictures, from running away from home, to working for this tiny little newspaper, to working for the largest newspaper in the world. Just like that. The newspaper, the USA Today, was circulation of 2.3 million at the time I shot the pictures of the surgery. It was my very first assignment for USA Today. On the morning of the surgery, I met with Vanderbilt University Medical Center Public Relations Director John Hauser in the lobby of the hospital. He took me to a room near the surgical suite where the surgery would take place. And after waiting in this room, something delayed the surgery and I never found out what, but after waiting in this room, John Hauser, head of PR, Public Relations at Vanderbilt, he brought Robert Davis into the room I was waiting in and introduced him to me as the reporter from USA Today that would be writing the story. This is a picture I shot of Julie Armas. This is Samuel's mother. She's 21 weeks pregnant in the hallway. Alex Armas is in the middle, and Dr. Joseph Bruner is on the right. And this is my vantage point in the operating room. There were sometimes up to 15 people scurrying around during this procedure. And this is how Robert Davis started his story for USA Today. It was the very beginning of his story. And I quote, "In the hushed but crowded operating room where outsiders have gathered to watch a rare medical event, spinal surgery on a fetus still in his mother's womb, a stool falls with a loud bang. Shh, said Joseph Bruner, the surgeon leading the operation. You'll wake the baby." Just over 1 hour into the surgery, the doctors began to close the opening to the uterus, and Dr. Bruner made a comment, and you could just feel the tension in the operating room just lift. The critical part of the surgery was over. Dr. Noel Tulipan asked me, "Michael, what speed of film are you using?" As I responded, 800 Fuji. This is back in the old days, right? Back in film days. In my last year of film, I went digital in the next year. But Dr. Tulipan asked me what speed of film I was using. And as I responded, 800 Fuji, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the uterus just shake, but no one was near it. It was shaking from within. Then immediately this little fist come flying out of the surgical opening, and this little unborn baby's arm, couldn't have been longer than this from top to bottom, was flailing back and forth. Dr. Bruner and I were wearing surgical masks. We looked right at each other. His eyes were big as silver dollars, I will never forget. He reached over to this flailing little unborn baby's arm, and just before he reached it, Samuel pulled back until just this little hand was sticking out. And I reacted and pulled my camera to my face, and as Dr. Bruner touched the little hand, I held my shutter button on my camera, and I fired. I just held the motor drive. And I have a very professional camera. It fires very fast. I was able to capture 4 frames as fast as my camera would fire. This will recycle. It will circle again in a loop. This is the first frame. Dr. Bruner lifted the little unborn baby's hand, and frame 2 here, as if he's waiting for a response. In frame 3, obviously Samuel squeezes back, and the doctor shakes the little fist. And then frame 4, and then it starts again. And this is just kind of a little sidebar. When all this was over with, I looked down at my camera, and if you know anything about photography, my knees almost buckled because of weakness. My shutter speed was set at a 60th of a second. I didn't walk into the surgery expecting to shoot an action photograph. And a lot of you probably don't understand what that means. You know how you take a picture out of a moving car and it comes out and it's a blur? If you could set your shutter speed at a 500th of a second, it wouldn't have been a blur. It would have been in focus. 60th of a second is not fast enough to stop my lips from moving. It wasn't fast enough to stop the action in the photograph. And you know, as a photographer, you know if you're good enough, if you saw it with your eye, you could have captured it with your camera. If you were only good enough to translate that, you know, your scene, what's happening, into what shutter speed should I use? What f-stop should I use? What lens should I use? And we have these pictures that haunt you. And I was thinking as this happened, that if I miss this, I will never forgive myself. But like I said, Dr. Bruner shook the little hand and all of a sudden it was gone. The nurse standing next to me said, "What happened?" I said, "The child reached out." She said, "Oh, they do that all the time." I was told to go to FedEx and send my unprocessed film to USA Today. I couldn't stop at a 1-hour lab and get the negatives processed only just to see if the picture came out. I had to send them the raw film. I had 9 36 exposure rolls. I sent them that day. And it seemed like 10 days before I finally got a call from the USA Today photo editor that had hired me, and he said, "Michael, it's the most incredible picture I've ever seen." And I went, yes! USA Today was happy with me. Maybe I'll get another assignment from them. And I thought, after my picture published, I thought someone from Vanderbilt might call me and congratulate me on capturing such a picture. I waited another week after the picture published, and I finally called John Hauser myself.